Let me first state my gratitude to the Clarity Coalition for your solidarity in these times of flaring up anti-Semitism. I'm honored to discuss the fight against anti-Semitism with Ayaan Hirsi Ali in the coming hour. Ayaan is an author, activist, and scholar about moral and functional superiority of Western values. She's a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, and her most recent book was published in 2021 called Pray. At that time, she still wrote that with an E. Today, maybe she would write it with an A. It's about the impact of Muslim immigration on women in Europe. Welcome, Ayaan. I want to welcome you, the founder, the initiating founder of the Clarity Coalition. Welcome here at the conference.
Well, thank you very, very much, Evelyn. And I want to do the same as you did, and that is to express my gratitude to the Clarity Coalition for their work, for their output, and most importantly, for sticking together.
Great. Okay, so let's start our discussion. In early October last year, you and I had breakfast together, and you warned me then that wokeism will generate a level of anti-Semitism I have never seen in my lifetime. A few days later, October 7 happened. And as of October 8, anti-Semitism exploded throughout the Western world. What made you predict this level of anti-Semitism coming from woke in our days?
And before I had this conversation with you, I had published in the Wall Street Journal an article comparing wokeism with Islamism, the similarities and the differences. And the more I looked into and read about social justice, capital S, capital J, and critical theory, this elaborate intersectionality, this web of identity politics, the more it became clear to me that on different levels, wokeism would produce an anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Jewish hatred. That it's the demands that the woke make, for instance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, creates openings that the Islamists take great advantage of and exploit. The narrative that there is a white oppressor and everyone else is oppressed, and that this white oppressor is wealthy or is the owner of these structures, that also makes it abundantly clear that Jewish people are considered, Jewish men are considered to be white, mostly family-oriented and therefore heterosexual, privileged, and exploiters. So the narrative of colonization, which is taught in our universities, of which I have just had a glimpse of some of the courses that are taught, seek to either avenge history, the history of colonialism of Western European countries, or they seek to finish off what they think of as the remaining colonial settler state, Israel. And so when they push this narrative and it encounters the Islamist narrative, of which I think the Clarity Coalition is familiar with, what you get is a flourishing of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the hatred of Israel, and what we're witnessing on university campuses across Western societies today.
Yes, so That's quite paradoxical that diversity, equity, and inclusion gives an opening to discrimination of Jews, actually.
And I think, Evelyn, it's important to note, I've had several conversations before October 7 with my liberal and progressive Jewish friends. I think what makes woke anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism sinister is the fact that because they're pushing for quote unquote justice and quote unquote equality and opening up opportunities for people who are less represented in society, it puts down one's sense of self-protection and self-preservation. It also dulls down one's sense of intellectual curiosity just by throwing out these altruistic sounding words. Even Jewish people, survivors of the Holocaust or survivors, children of the survivors of the Holocaust, tend to agree with the woke agenda up to a point, at least enough not to question it or to turn away or to think we'll simply write a check and they will leave us alone, and then really come out mugged by reality as we've seen since October 7.
Yes, and you met quite some Jewish people who advocated for woke and supported it, and I have the same experience. We have seemed to be bamboozled by the words and the superficial idea, and also where those of us who saw through it thought we can maybe appease by giving it some support. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think it allows for a lot of self-deception. As you know, ideas have consequences, and within every idea, there is a logic inherent in it. And if you work it out to its logical conclusion, you get somewhere. And I think what some of the Jewish progressives and even Jewish liberals fail to see until now is to exercise their critical faculties and think, okay, if this is what they want, if they're saying we need to bring down a colonial entity or settler colonial, as they call it, by all means necessary, and at the same time they're waving BDS flags, and at the same time they're declaring Jewish communities to be white and privileged, when only a few decades ago Jews were in fact selected for not being white enough and annihilated. I think what I saw then was a dulling down of this intellectual curiosity, and I run around in academic circles, so it is our job to do critical thinking, to say, hang on a minute, what are you saying? And if I follow the thread of your ideas, where is this going to take me? And I feel that a lot of people failed to see that with the woke.
Right. So now that we have woke in our academic institutions and at many places elsewhere, how severe you think the current anti-Semitism could become?
Well, there are people in the room who know way more than I do about far-right anti-Semitism. The KKK type of anti-Semitism, that's not my expertise. But I think that far-right anti-Semitism exists. And then you have the far-left anti-Semitism, which comes dressed up as criticism of Israel or anti-Zionism. And then, of course, you have the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism. you take these two groups together that are now three groups together, two of them of which are forming a coalition of convenience and expedience. And you can imagine if this continues unchallenged, the repercussions of that, I think it's incredibly frightening. When I visit Europe, I find places like the United Kingdom where before October 7, many Jewish people didn't realize they were Jewish. They thought that the years of Jeremy Corbyn, who was Labour leader, and the antisemitism that manifested in England, in Britain during those years had been addressed, now feeling really frightened. I've spoken to Jewish friends who say when they walk the streets of Paris or Amsterdam or London, they feel way more frightened and unsettled and insecure than when they walk the streets of Dubai and even Riyadh. And I find that unsettling.
Right. So is the current anti-Semitism only a threat to the Jews, or is it a threat to wider Western society? Could you please elaborate on that?
I think everybody in this room knows that this is a war on the West, and it's coming through the Jewish communities in the state of Israel. That is always the gateway to the next level of violence, first ideological, and then in action, as we've seen in October 7th. And if you look at the Islamist-driven narratives, that is very, very clear. Islamists say they will destroy Israel because they see it as an obstacle to the ultimate society, the utopia that they seek, which is a society based on Sharia law. And so Iran, in her quest to establish a caliphate, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, in his quest to establish a caliphate, the Muslim Brotherhood and various other NGOs and other Islamist movements that are international, in their quest to establish Sharia-based societies, they see Israel only as an obstacle. Eliminate Israel and then move on to the next and the next and the next. And I think what they see in Israel, what they see in Jewish communities, is this resistance to adopt these new ideas and ideologies. The woke run into the same problems. You may find a handful of Jewish progressives here and there, but Jewish people and Jewish communities seem to be solid in their identity. And I think that incites a great deal of hostility because it is, Jews are seen as doing what the Christians aren't doing. The Christians or societies that previously used to be predominantly Christian are not resisting these incursions, these ideological and moral incursions. In fact, they're accommodating it. And so, in a way, you can see the logic behind the Islamist agenda, which is it's really becoming easy to convert people. It's easier to convert these lost souls who were previously Christian and are seeking some form of meaning and purpose in life. Why not for these Jews? Why can't they just submit? I've read some of the manuals of da'wah that divide different groups. They target different groups, how to bring da'wah to the Hispanics, how to bring da'wah to women, how to bring da'wah to the African Americans, to the Jews, and the worries that they share about the Jews and the Jewish resistance to da'wah is very different to these other communities that they seem to have almost no problem with.
So, yeah, what do you see in those posts or whatever it is on Dawa? What is exactly what do they say about the Jews?
So roughly speaking, the communities that are easy to penetrate are low social economic communities, communities that for whatever reason, are going through some sort of breakdown. It may be a family breakdown, it may be dislocation, but it's people who are poor and feel that they need help and are not getting this help either from their communities or from the government. So what the Islamists who are engaged in dawah activism, what they do is they invite these quote unquote lost people or help-seeking people into their mosques, into the Islamic centers. They help them with charity work. And that translates that goodness and kindness translates into convincing some of these individuals to accept Islam and to see Islam as something good and constructive. Now, if they try and do similar things with what they see as closed Jewish communities, some of the complaints they make are, well, they're only dedicated to making money. Well, they're only dedicated to success. They're only dedicated to the state of Israel. They're only dedicated, the Jewish communal attention is perceived as being one of unity, dedicated to something earthly, making money, winning Nobel Prizes, shining through in the Eurovision Song Festival, whatever, any kind of cultural achievement, and then dedicated to the success of Israel. The Zionist activism of sending young children, for instance, from America for Aliyah to Israel to experience what it is like to have a Jewish state. All of these forms of Jewish life are seen, Jewish communal life as seen as an obstacle to the great and good utopia of a Sharia society down the road.
Oh,
And I'm not even mentioning, when I say all of it, I'm not even mentioning the age-old tropes, anti-Semitic tropes. They control the world, they are corrupt, they want to destroy the world. I'm setting all of that aside. What I'm conveying to you now is some of the real serious problems that dawah agents are running into when they attempt to change communities and when they give the feedback to their leadership to say, I've tried converting the Hispanics here are the problems I run into. I've tried converting women, here are the problems I run into. I tried to get into the Jewish communities, here are the problems I run into. So that's what I'm describing. I'm not even describing the age-old, Jews and devils and
so that's really new to me to hear that in that Islamist dawah let's say communication that they are complaining about the stubborn Jewish identity that they cannot win over, which we'll discuss possible solutions shortly, but that gives me hope that if we work on our Jewish, keep working on our Jewish identity, then there is not so much a chance that the Islamists will win us over. Could you also generalize maybe that to, if we would talk about solutions, is then identity, Western identity, Western values, and being proud of those and mastering them, is that something that you think would also be in the way of Islamists outside of the Jewish community?
I think any ideological group, Islamist or woke or far right, or even just cults, they can change vulnerable individuals and groups. And it's harder to penetrate and change whole communities who have their own traditions and rituals and meaning-making institutions. I was listening to a talk by Jonathan Haidt, who studies the effect of social media on young people, and in particular the smartphone. And he's come to the conclusion that you know, a lot of young people, especially teenage girls, are at higher risk of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. But he also says, as a side note, he finds this, say, for instance, among liberal communities, and doesn't find it so much among Christian or communities in America that identify as Christian. And I think that tells you, it shows you that communities that have a coherent spiritual and meaning-making, traditional self-awareness are harder to subvert than communities that don't have that. Another example, and I think some of the members here at Clarity will tell you this, when you look at Islamists who recruit for terrorist organizations and convince young men and women, back in the day, it was in 2016, 17, 18, to join ISIS or to blow themselves up as lone wolves, it's easier to get this type of jihadi from broken families, from individuals that come from families where Islam was not taught at all or properly taught. And so every community you see, even among Muslims, it's harder to subvert if there is the natural, you know, someone comes and tries to sell you on an ideology, and you are capable of asking questions and saying, what I have is satisfying for me. I'm happy with what I have. Thank you, go try the next person. Jehovah's Witnesses come and knock on the door, you politely close the door. The communities that don't close the door are the communities that don't have doors.
Right. So is then what is the status of this solid identity and solid values? What is the status of that in the Western world, you think, vis-a-vis Islamist attacks on our minds and lives?
So I started this, went on Substack and started this blog called Restoration. And the problem, as I see it, and many others, I think now it is more and more people accept this idea that stories matter, national narratives matter, civilizational narratives matter. And if you discard yours, then you make your society very, very vulnerable. And if you ask me what has been discarded, and I've publicly apologized for the fact that I was part of the atheist movement and advancing atheist. And what I found in the years after is atheism does not give you a coherent, meaning-making, purposeful story that you rely on in those times when you find yourself in mental and spiritual difficulties. And in the modern world, we see more and more people finding themselves in moral and spiritual difficulties and having nowhere to turn. The humanist communities will raise money to go and help people in third world countries or accept asylum seekers and bring them into the country and say, we have to show our humanity by being kind, by being generous, by saving lives. But after they've saved those lives, they don't offer them any kind of communal narrative. And so what happens is this vacuum of morality and spirituality, and that is filled by other forces. And the forces in town today are, of course, wokeism that we've discussed extensively, and radical Islam, radical political Islam, da'wah, and the spread of da'wah. And then there are other I mean, for those who study cults and the like, there are other smaller groups, but these are the big ones. And so if Western society wants to push back against these really bad ideas, they have to dust off their own good ideas and restore them, restore the churches, restore religious teaching in school, restore robustly this Christian or Judeo-Christian religious identity, and let it do its work.
Do you see a version of that that is not religious for those who do not want to be religious?
I do, and it's the same message as to religious people, which is define what you stand for and defend it. And what I think has happened, let me give you an example of what we have done to National Socialism. When I came to the Netherlands in 1992, I was asked to study the Dutch language, and then I went and did political science in Leiden. And at that time, between 1995 and 2000, perhaps 2001, Evelyn, you were there was this great reckoning, national reckoning that was happening in Holland of the National Socialist past, people in Holland who had collaborated with the Nazis. Why did they leave their Jews unprotected? Why did they betray their Jewish communities? And later on, I found out that it wasn't just the Dutch who were making this reckoning. It was, in fact, all of Western society. So what I mean by that is Nazism was forensically reckoned with. And from every corner, it was shown to be a horrible, destructive idea and a losing idea. So the people who were neo-Nazis were kept on the fringe, and they were shunned, and they were either, if they're young people, you educate them, you try to tell them where this leads. But in any case, Nazism, National Socialism in the West is not tolerated. We haven't done that to communism and Marxism. There was just a little bit of it, but not as forensically as National Socialism. So the idea still holds its utopic force. And the same thing with Islamism. Islamism is brutally subjugated with force. When Al-Qaeda came up, it was destroyed. When ISIS came up, it was destroyed with military means. But we've never really engaged with the roots of Islamism as an idea. So it still holds its utopic force. And I think if we want to destroy these two bad ideas, it can only be fought, and the war is going to be definitively decided on the battlefield of ideas.
Okay. So, I think positive identity and reckoning with bad ideas is basically what you recommend the West vis-a-vis Islamism and woke.
The same exercise as I described. I haven't seen just the massive outputs. I don't know if you recall this, Evelyn, but there were movies like Schindler's List. There were numerous documentaries. There would be every so often a large newspaper article that had dug up into the past of the husband of the Queen's relative who had at one point sympathized with the Nazis, and that was such a huge scandal. There was, of course, the trials. The story of Eichmann was told. I found out about it in my classroom in Leiden. We didn't have similar things. We haven't had a similar dissection of communism as an idea that leads to the annihilation of millions of people. everywhere it's tried. It leads to tyranny, it leads to starvation, it leads to the gulag many times over. I have stood in lines as a child for food because they had introduced food rationing. We were a poor country, but we had enough to feed ourselves. And when the communists came in, we were starving, and that led to famines. And everywhere where communism has been tried, these stories can be told, but we haven't actually told it the way it needs to be told. And so these ideas hold their utopian force. You can come back into Columbia University and Penn State and Harvard and Stanford and tell these young and impressionable, brilliant minds that communism and Marxism is an appealing idea if only we were to engage in knocking off the settler colonial entity called Israel. They can't even find it on the map. They don't know where Palestine is. They don't know the story. But of course, again, for utopian ideas, you don't have the key to utopia is to drive your congregation away from reality. And we've allowed this divorce from reality to continue.
Right. So, could the rising anti-Semitism, you think, be used as an opportunity in the defense of Western values?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think we have to, because the history of what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust is not so far away. The people who survived the Holocaust, many of them are still alive. And of course, for their children and grandchildren, it's the first story. I think it is the story of anti-Semitism and the story of scapegoating, of finding a minority to scapegoat and blame everything on, is a story that can be universally recognized. And if told well, I think we can stand with our Jewish communities and with the state of Israel against different forms of hatred. But in order to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves and with our Jewish communities and with the world at large about who exactly are we facing off with and what do we stand to lose.
So, to refer to the suffering of Jews during the Holocaust and referring to the scapegoating of Jews, and not only of Jews, but that has happened to other minorities as well. You think that is an opportunity to break the let's say the woke propaganda, the Islamist propaganda?
It's a piece of it, and I think I wouldn't use the word refer, I would use the word teach. Again, let me take you back to the Netherlands. I became aware of my anti-Semitism and my Jew hatred in the classroom because I was taught about the Holocaust. And that story appealed to me as a human being, and I realized that I had been lied to and that I was prejudiced against the people I had never met. And in fact, against the people who were persecuted and who had gone through a lot of suffering. In the late 90s and 2000s, when the Islamists were finding their voice and developing a clout in the Netherlands and other European countries, one of the demands they made was we should not teach about the Holocaust. People who have idiotic ideologies to advance deny the Holocaust. They don't want it taught. The same thing in America and back in in Europe. Every time I look back and I see, so how is that going? You see that that's completely eliminated. And I'm not saying it's the only way, But I think if you want to build these common humanities, what do we have in common as Americans? And you want to open again, the classroom for me is the place where education takes place. Of course, it's at home, and then it's in the classroom, and later on online. But to start these conversations, you have to tell the stories of people who look like you, who are the same age, the same circumstances, and look at what happened to them. We just use the big word antisemitism. And for a lot of young people, if they haven't been taught about the Holocaust, if they don't know any Jews, they don't know what happened. They're easy to lead this way or the other way. And you see also the resistance. I've come across it often. There is a resistance to using the word antisemitism. People say, but I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm simply criticizing Israel. Or I'm simply anti-Zionist. Or is it wrong to, does that make me an anti-Semite? And they know deep down that the scapegoating and the hatred towards Jews, and I think somewhere they also know that if you're seeking to eliminate Israel from the river to the sea, that makes you an anti-Semite. But to drive the point home, I think there is no alternative to teaching young people about the Holocaust, to taking them to Yad Vashem and other Holocaust memorials. That story has to be told. It changed my mind. I've seen it change the minds of hundreds of people. I think that especially now, I know this group knows it better than I do, the Arab Muslim countries have realized after Al-Qaeda and after ISIS and the triumph of the Muslim Brotherhood in 2011, 2012, when Mohammed Morsi became the elected president of Egypt, that they don't want the Islamist agenda. And a lot of these young, well-educated Gulf Arabs who are ready to normalize relations with Israel would welcome being educated on the Holocaust, not only to normalize relations with Israel, not only to become friends of Israel or allies, but to see for themselves that people who looked like them, who hail from the same background, at some point in Germany and in Europe, were found not to be of the perfect race, were accused of all sorts of mischief, and that hatred and prejudice was translated into actions that ended up in the gas chambers. I think that would give them, it's a basic story, and that story is not told, and all of these anti-Semitic groups and people resist the story of the Holocaust. They don't want to tell it, and we have to tell it.
Right, but for that we have to win our classrooms back first, right?
Yes.
Do you have advice on that?
I have advice on how to win the classrooms back. For what it's worth, I think, number one, these sorts of culture wars don't fight themselves. Number two, the word coalition and clarity says it all. We have to find allies, even if we don't agree on everything, to say we agree on the big picture, which is American society, Western civilization has given us not a perfect opportunity to live freely and happily, but the best opportunity that humankind has known. Let's preserve it first, and then let's advance it. And to do that, that begins in the classroom. It's what is your university degree from and beyond. Pre-K, we have to recapture those institutions. And the how of it,